Good afternoon and welcome to the third webinar of the series focusing on the Daughters of Penelope mandatory and voluntary projects. We are so pleased that you have joined us. Today, our presentation is on Sjogren's syndrome. I must admit, when this charity was added on to our list of projects, I did not know very much about it. But last year, I had the opportunity to meet with Ben, and he increased my knowledge about Sjogren syndrome. So, without any further ado, Grand Governor Kathy Matrakas will introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy you can join us today, and I have the distinct honor of introducing our two speakers from the Sjogren Syndrome Foundation, Stephen Taylor and Benjamin Basloe. Before I do that, I would like to remind you that any questions can be included in the chat session, and please make sure to send the questions to both panelists and all attendees. Thank you. Our first speaker, Stephen Taylor, is President and CEO and joined the Sjogren Syndrome Foundation in 2003. Under his leadership, he focuses on advancing Sjogren's research, increasing clinical trials for new therapies, including the first ever guidance on how to treat and manage Sjogren's, as well as the development of clinical practice guidelines for care. In 2009, the foundation launched an international clinical trials consortium to work alongside industry to investigate new therapies for Sjogren's and ultimately give patients choices for therapies to treat their Sjogren's syndrome. In 2012, Stephen launched a 5-year breakthrough goal to shorten the time to diagnose Sjogren's by 50% in 5 years by increasing awareness and education of the disease among healthcare professionals and the general public. Initially, it took 6 years for diagnosis, and now it averages 2.8 years. Stephen also focuses on increasing the foundation income resources through a variety of community service and fundraising projects, and has presented on Capitol Hill to promote better access to health care and health insurance. Stephen has a personal interest with Sjogren's, as his mother was diagnosed in 1995 with the disease prior to joining the foundation. Our second speaker is Benjamin Basloe, who is Senior Vice President of Operations in Philanthropy. He formerly was the National Director of Development and joined the foundation in 2012. He has spent his career with nonprofits, with the majority in the health sector. Ben leads and grows the foundation's private philanthropy by managing and coordinating all individual and private foundation giving. This includes fostering and maintaining relationships with volunteers, donors, members, along with strategic partnerships with private, corporate, and family partnerships. Ben works with the Chief Executive Officer and National Board of Directors to advance the philanthropic support of the foundation. Thank you both for joining us today and sharing their important work on the Sjogren Syndrome Foundation.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that honor. I think we can begin and Ben will share our presentation. First, I just want to thank Elena for her amazing leadership and partnership that we've had with her over the number of years, and also thank Kathy Lawrence, a member of Daughters of Penelope, for all she's done to connect us all together as well. And of course, Kathy, Celia, and Georgette, thank you for your leadership of Daughters of Penelope as well. I know the membership appreciate your work as well. So today we're going to share a little bit about Sjogren's. I'm going to turn it over. Ben's going to pull up our slides. I'm going to turn it over to Ben Basloe, who will kind of run through a little bit about our disease. I'll come back and talk about diagnosis and treatment, and then we'll go into what we've been doing at the foundation to share the activities that we've been doing and what with your funds and your support as well. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you to everyone as well. I'm very excited to be here. This is obviously a unique opportunity that we get to do this virtually, but it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to so many daughters and get the awareness out about the foundation. As Steve said, obviously we are incredibly grateful for the Daughters of Penelope continued support, and to be recognized as a national project, is a true honor. So as Steve mentioned, I'll quickly go through the disease itself. As Grand President Celia mentioned, it's not necessarily all that well known. It's actually been referred to, I think, in many cases as one of the most common autoimmune diseases that people have never heard of. Sjogren's is a chronic rheumatic autoimmune disease in which the white blood cells attack the moisture-producing glands in a person's body. It is also a systemic disease, meaning that it infects the entire body. There are 4 million estimated patients that are diagnosed, making it the second most common rheumatic autoimmune disease, and nearly 1 in every 70 people is affected. This makes Sjogren's actually 3 times more common than much better known diseases such as lupus and multiple sclerosis. It does fall into, for those individuals that are not as familiar with Sjogren's, we like to talk about it as sort of a cousin of the lupus and arthritis world. It does affect 9 out of 10 women, although as the next little image shows, that although it impacts 40-year-olds and higher, it can affect all age groups, all sexes, all younger, older. It definitely can impact anyone and everyone, which we have seen more and more. And just another quick note, as I mentioned, those other diseases, 50% of all Sjogren patients actually have at least one other autoimmune disease. So it is somewhat even more difficult, as Steve will allude to in a little bit in terms of diagnosis, to be able to determine the actual diagnosis of Sjogren's. As I was mentioning, in terms of what Sjogren's is, it affects the entire body. There are symptoms specifically of extensive dryness, and this primarily is seen with dry mouth and dry eyes, can also be with dry skin, but there are other serious complications that can include profound fatigue, chronic pain, major organ involvement, neuropathies, and lymphomas. Unfortunately, Sjogren's actually has a higher percentage of individuals that can get lymphoma as a diagnosis. These are all symptoms. Some people may have minor symptoms. Some people may have much more severe symptoms. It is unfortunately not a one-size-fits-all disease, and it's really one of those where you are monitoring your own individual symptoms to determine what is the most serious issue that you're dealing with. I won't go through this entire image, but this sort of highlights some of the most common issues that people do have. I think one of the biggest things that I just want to mention is that as many Sjogren's patients will tell you, they look incredibly healthy. They may look completely fine, but inside they are suffering in a great way that is hard to very much explain. It's a lot of times they refer to it as the invisible disease because no one really is able to see. So while someone may say that they are just too tired to go out to dinner, someone else may say, oh, come on, you can get out and you'll be okay. They don't realize that the individual is truly so fatigued that they are not able to get out of bed and able to just leave the house. So this is also something that I would be more than happy to share to Ellen if she ever wanted to share in the future. And it's also something that can be downloaded and found on our website, but it does give a very nice snapshot of all the different ways that unfortunately the disease can impact each individual. And as I mentioned, while Sjogren's has traditionally been thought to occur in individuals 40 and older, we have seen considerable number of patients who are younger than 40 and also now seen more common in children that has been known. Steve actually has spearheaded for the foundation a very big focus in pediatric Sjogren's, which has been fantastic, and we've had a number of families that have come together and been able to focus more on the children impact. What is very interesting is many patients that you talk to, whether they're 40, 50, 70, 80, will tell you that even though it took so long to be diagnosed, they probably had many of these symptoms when they were a child. So it's very interesting when they learn about the work that we're doing in this area and think, oh my goodness, that is definitely something that I could attribute to myself as well. So a major difference between adults and children with Sjogren's are the most clinical presenting features. While over time, children with Sjogren's can often see the same disease symptoms, initially it looks slightly different than it presents in adults. So that certainly causes an additional challenge in terms of diagnosis. And then I will pass it off to Steve to talk further. Steve, you're muted.
course I am. Thanks, Ben, for that great overview. I will jump into diagnosis and treatment a little bit. Although the biggest thing that we can do today is increase your awareness on what Sjogren's is, which Ben did a great job, and we hope that you'll learn more as well. As Ben said, it ranges from children all the way to any age. It can be diagnosed with the disease. And it also goes across all ethnicities. So you'll see studies done in Italy, studies done in the United States, South America, Greece, Norway. You'll see about the same percent of population, 1 to 1.5% of every population has Sjogren's. Not all diagnosed yet, but that has been shown in all the studies that have been done around the globe. Diagnosing Sjogren's has been a challenge in the US in the past. We are increasing awareness and have done very well with it. Back in 2012, we set a goal to decrease the time to diagnose Sjogren's. At the time in 2012, it took 6 years to get diagnosed. And so we set the goal 50% in 5 years, meaning we wanted to cut that by 50% over 5 years. And I'm very proud, after very diligent work by over 500 volunteers, our board of directors and staff, we were able to see that decrease to 2.8 years, which is still a long time to struggle with the symptoms, although it's common in autoimmune diseases to take a little more time to get a diagnosis, but 2.8 years is way better than 6 years suffering with symptoms and not knowing what it is. In addition, as you'll see on the next slide, there's various ways to diagnose the disease. This is one of the reasons it takes a little bit longer. There's both objective and subjective testing. So subjective testing is, do your eyes feel dry? How long have they felt dry? How is your mouth? Do you have problems swallowing food? More subjective from the patient. The objective testing is blood tests, eye tests, and dental tests that go through various things. And there's a scoring system that then if you get so many points after being asked and looked at in both objective and subjective side, then you'll be diagnosed with Sjogren's. It's still becoming an art, a little bit of a science, a little bit of an art to diagnose Sjogren's. We're working on new biomarkers to hopefully speed that diagnosis up. For example, there's some research being done on saliva, that maybe we can test saliva for biomarkers and be able to tell you that you have Sjogren's. Same in tears. We're looking at salivary lacrimal glands in your eyes as well. And so we are working on various things to speed up this diagnosis. In regards to treatment, on the next 2 slides, there is no one treatment for our disease, and that is a challenge for those that suffer from this disease. My mother is a Sjogren's patient. She was diagnosed before I joined the foundation. I joined about 6 years after she was diagnosed to be the CEO. And really the challenge with her disease, like so many patients, is she takes a various number of products, mostly over-the-counter products, some prescription products, to treat her various symptoms. There are a few drugs on the market that can help treat the disease or slow down the progression, but they're not identified just for Sjogren's. And on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that, because rheumatologists are the typical doctors that will have the primary responsibility to manage a patient's disease. They'll be then referred to a multitude of specialists, from ophthalmologists and eye care providers, dentists, OBGYNs, pulmonologists, neurologists, et cetera, are on the list. And our patients average between 6 and 8 doctors a year they see to treat their various complications. And then, of course, they're on a multitude of treatments for their disease. One of the most common treatments that patients end up on is a drug you've probably heard of in the past year. It's hydroxychloroquine, also known as Plaquenil. The name brand is called Plaquenil. But hydroxychloroquine is a drug that sort of slows down the progression of the disease and treats various symptoms from the disease, like fatigue and dryness, et cetera. But it's not specifically just for Sjogren's. It is used in RA and lupus and in Sjogren's, been used in Sjogren's for 35 years. And as you know, you've probably heard of hydroxychloroquine, because last year it was talked about. We had a major shortage in the United States because people had some hope that it might work in the treatment of COVID, and we knew and that's been proven wrong. And so the shortage was caused very much heartache in our patient population for no reason. But we're glad that finally people are realizing it does not work in COVID, and that we can keep it for RA, Sjogren's, and lupus patients, and make sure they're treated, because a lot of our patients lost their prescriptions because they've ran out in the United States. So that's a #1 drug that a lot of patients end up on. But again, it's not just for Sjogren's. And later we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to help come up with new treatments for our patients. We're working very hard with clinical trials to have new products on the market that will treat just Sjogren's and treat the entire disease in the body. Ben's going to talk a little bit about the foundation and who we are, and then I'll jump back in to talk about details about what we're doing.
Thank you, Steve. So the Within actually, I was going to say within the last year, the last year seems like it might have been a decade. But early in 2020, the foundation established a vision that we wanted to create a community where patients, healthcare professionals, and researchers come together to conquer the complexity of Sjogren's. The vision actually, I think, speaks nicely to our relationship actually with the daughter Penelope, because we are creating a community, we're increasing awareness, we're certainly helping fund some of the work that we're doing. And so it is that aspect of a community where we're coming together to fight this disease. In addition to a vision, we also updated our mission. I won't read through each individual one, I'll let you look at those, but that's because when we keep going forward, Steve is gonna address how each of the mission area addresses the work that we're doing. But very in summary, obviously we're supporting Sjogren's patients, we're trying to educate healthcare professionals, we are leading and funding innovative research, and we're serving as the voice of all Sjogren's patients. And as Steve mentioned, the voice is one of the areas that I think that we've been able to strive the most over the past year in terms of whether it's the hydroxychloroquine issue, speaking up on behalf of our patients, or just providing the support that our patient community has needed throughout the pandemic and in general. So we take great pride in serving as that voice for all Sjogren's patients.
Ben, I think Steve mentioned also about Plaquenil. We have one question from one of the viewer participants. Do you all know what the impact of COVID exposure and or infection, on individuals diagnosed with Sjogren's disease?
Yeah, I can surely jump in. So there's been a number of registries established for autoimmune disease patients in the United States, not just Sjogren's, but all autoimmune diseases patients, to track them during COVID. We have seen not necessarily an increase in Sjogren's patients having COVID. However, we believe some of the decrease in numbers of Sjogren's patients or other autoimmune disease patients getting COVID have been because they've been extremely diligent, knowing they have a comorbidity that could cause a complication. So some of the research may be a little off base because of that. But some of the research has shown our biggest challenge with Sjogren's and COVID is those patients have pulmonary complications. Obviously, COVID is a very big risk factor to cause pulmonary complications. And if you already are susceptible to that because of a disease like Sjogren's, that is the most dangerous complication combined with your Sjogren's. So that's been one thing they've looked at, and they've surely seen some of our patients go downhill from that. However, we've not seen a rise in the population. The other big area that's a concern with autoimmune disease patients and Sjogren's specifically is if you're on an immunosuppressant, meaning a drug that slows down your progression of your disease because it slows down your immune system. So it's not, hydroxychloroquine is actually not in that category, but many other drugs our patients take, like methotrexate and Cellcept, et cetera, are in the immunosuppressant state. So they basically slow down your immune system so that you don't, so that it doesn't get overactive. So your disease isn't being overactive in your body. Thus, it makes you more susceptible to colds, flu, et cetera, obviously COVID. And so those patients are our biggest concern. If you're on an immunosuppressant, to stay definitely more out of the public, also staying home, making sure you're following the CDC guidelines of masking and 6 feet apart, but even more than that if you're on an immunosuppressant. So that's where we're going to see the biggest challenge with our disease, but we haven't seen it higher or more complications in Sjogren's overall.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in if that's good. I'll jump in, Georgette, and continue on, and surely interrupt with other questions. I appreciate them. We love questions, and you can put them in the chat room. One of our pillars of our mission is to provide patients with support and education. And we do that in many, many areas. I have to tell you, we were founded by Elaine Harris on Long Island back in 1983. And her big motto was, a patient organization is always going to be helping patients. And that's our number one priority at the foundation. Although we've moved into other areas, we still focus on making sure that we are always there for the patient. So we run 65 support groups in the United States. Just this past year with COVID, we've pivoted and started to offer Zoom town hall meetings, both on health and wellness topics, so that we could help meet them where they were. So back in April and May, for example, patients, no one was leaving their home. We weren't either. And so we knew that they might not need more information about their health, like more information about Sjogren specifically, but we did know they needed wellness topics like stress relief, spirituality, and Sjogren's. yoga and Sjogren's, meditation, things that they could do at home to help alleviate some of the stress of just living with COVID all around us when we didn't know what it was back then. We still don't know everything, but we surely have learned a little bit more to live with it. So we pivoted to do those wellness topics. We've then moved towards doing additional health topics this past fall, and then of course moved all of our support groups online as well. And we continue to pivot and make moves that are going to help our patient population. On the next slide, you also see that we do run a one-day patient conference. This past year, we moved it to a virtual conference with over 850 patients. And then this past fall, we offered a one-day virtual conference where patients could come either the 2-day in June or in November when we held the 1-day and hear from experts about their disease, experts that treat the disease in patients. And then they were able to be interactive and ask questions of those patients, similar to what we're doing today with the webinar. That was what our conference looked like as well. And then in addition, we publish a newsletter that comes out 6 times a year called Conquering Sjogren's. It's a 20-page newsletter that goes out to our members and our patients that help educate them about the disease with articles and questions and answers written by healthcare professionals or researchers to help just bring them up to speed on how it is to live with Sjogren's. And then finally, another big project that we have under supporting patients, we did launch a new YouTube talk show series called Exploring Sjogren. Season 1 is online now on YouTube. We have 6 episodes. They're very short, 8 to 10 minute episodes where you can go learn. I am the host. I interview doctors to learn more about the disease and patients. And so you'll see the topics listed on the screen for season 1. I'm excited. You'll be one of the first publicly to know, but season 2 will be launching this Friday. We have a 4-part series for season 2. Coming up will be topics of fatigue, how to obtain Social Security disability when you become disabled because of your Sjogren's. And then we have a 2-part series coming out on pediatric Sjogren's, both talking to pediatric rheumatologists as well as young children and their parents about living with Sjogren's as well. So supporting patients is very, very important to us. In addition to that, I will move to the next slide. We did develop our first ever clinical practice guidelines for the disease. This is our how to treat and manage and monitor the disease for the doctors to use. So in this, our guidelines are a very comprehensive list of recommendations that doctors can use to treat their patients. So for example, most diseases have clinical practice guidelines. If you're diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes, the doctors will have a guideline that's been endorsed and written by healthcare professionals that tells the doctor what to do based on different symptoms of the disease you might have. In our disease, no organization wanted to write the guidelines, so our organization, the Sjögren's Foundation, decided to write these guidelines for doctors to have. So we recruited about 200 physicians to help us write and review these guidelines. Because the disease has been so well explained earlier, affects every body, organ, and system, we will end up having to write about 25 different sets of guidelines when we're all said and done to treat the disease. So it's a huge undertaking, both financially as well as time commitment for the organization and for our volunteers. We have come out with a number of already guidelines that are out publicly endorsed by trade associations of specialists that doctors are using. We have our ocular guidelines out. We have dry mouth guidelines out, which is dental caries prevention, which means how to prevent the horrendous tooth decay our patients have. What can you do in advance to hopefully prevent some of that? And then we have four manifestations that we have specific guidelines on that are in the systemic area: fatigue, the use of some biological therapies that are on the market, what we suggest doctors use them for, inflammatory musculoskeletal pain, and then our most recent guidelines that just came out is our pulmonary complications. They were just endorsed by the Pulmonologist Association this past fall, printed in their publication, and they'll be publicly available to all doctors and patients starting this month in January. Just to give you an example, in the pulmonary space, there are 52 recommendations within that guideline. So everything from what should we do to pre-screen for pulmonary complications? Should you have chest x-rays, MRIs, CAT scans? And what should you do if you do have recurring bronchitis, recurring pneumonia? Because our disease affects the moisture glands in a person's body. So lungs are affected because moisture is used in the lungs to help transfer oxygen. And thus it causes diseases in the lung a lot more frequently. And so pulmonary complications are so important. And a lot of doctors don't know what to do when they see recurring bronchitis or pneumonia in a Sjogren's patient. And then there's more serious complications like interstitial lung disease and other diseases that can cause some Sjogren's patients to have to look at lung transplants. So pulmonary guidelines go from everything, as I mentioned, from prevention all the way through and pre-screening all the way through treating of the most serious complications. So a huge undertaking for us, but will serve our patients because these guidelines are out there. And now we've moved on to vasculitis, lymphoma, and neuropathies as our next 3 sets of guidelines. And so our doctors are currently working on those.
One of our sisters has asked the question if Sjogren's is genetically transmitted.
Great question. So it's specifically Sjogren's. You will see with autoimmune diseases, you'll see, unfortunately, women are way more likely to get an autoimmune disease. There's about 88 identified autoimmune diseases in the country or in the world. And most of them, except for 5, unfortunately, I think I have mostly women on this call, skew towards women. So you're all more likely to get an autoimmune disease than your male family members, unfortunately. And they skew from anywhere from 55, 60, 70%. Our disease, 90% women, 10% men. With that, you'll see autoimmune diseases run in families. So it's a great question. So you might see a grandmother with a lupus. The mother has nothing, but the granddaughter might end up with Sjogren's. You might see twins. One has lupus, one has Sjogren's, or you might see the twins both have Sjogren's. There's been a number of studies, but you'll see that work being done in the genetic research by a number of institutions, including Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation, that we funded grants in, have found now I think it's over 15 genes that they've identified for Sjogren's. Half of those genes are also lupus genes. So you're going to see overlap of genes. What we don't know exactly yet is what triggers those genes to become active to cause Sjogren's to have in a person's body. So, but at least the more genes we identify, the more we'll be able to do the next step of figuring out how those genes get triggered. We believe it's hormonal. Some environmental factors might be there, such as Lyme's disease or Epstein-Barr, which is mono, might trigger those genes, but we also know that hormones are related because most common time of diagnosis is going to be puberty, pregnancy and delivery, or perimenopause. And we see our disease be diagnosed very often during those times because we believe the hormones are moving and raging in different ways, and thus might cause those genes to become more active and the disease to become more prominent to get diagnosed. So great question. So you definitely will see that in families, and that's why telling your family members your health history is so critical, not just for Sjogren's, for any disease, but for Sjogren's and autoimmune diseases. So your daughters or your granddaughters or your grandmother or your mother can know if you have Sjogren's, so they can be watched for autoimmune diseases in their background as well, or in their life.
Yeah, Steve, another comment, one of the participants said that she has Sjogren's, but she has few of the traditional symptoms. She has more of a connective tissue inflammation and degeneration. And she was wondering if this is also in the symptom diagram. I guess you covered a little bit in the clinical practice with inflammatory musculoskeletal pain. Hers was, I think she mentioned more in the wrists, but
yeah, I saw that. And so we have joint pain throughout the entire body and issues with joints working because of the lack of moisture and the disease affecting those joints. There is a challenge with our disease with joint pain because sometimes patients have rheumatoid arthritis, which is a joint condition, along with their Sjogren's. And so their joint pain can be from RA or from Sjogren's, or it can be just Sjogren's joint pain. Now, Sjogren's joint pain is typically more current and stays the same over time. RA patients, it can get worse over time. So you'll see joints freezing and more deformity from RA than you will in Sjogren's. Sjogren's joint pain stays the same on an X-ray over time and is burdensome and challenging to live with. So I'm sorry for the patient that asked that question. Connective tissue disease, we used to be in that kind of category, and we still are we are considered a connective tissue disease, but we've been identified as a separate disease, although there are a number of patients that are diagnosed with just a connective tissue disease because they can't figure out which one it might be, or it might not be identified in the world yet. And so they have that for areas that they don't know where it is, and maybe the person doesn't fully qualify in the Sjogren's diagnosis, nor in the rheumatoid arthritis diagnosis. That's what RA, in case I keep saying RA, rheumatoid arthritis. And so that is a great question. And definitely, I noticed during her question, she's been diagnosed with it because of her SSA, which is a blood work that we do during trial. So surely that degenerative risk may be caused by another autoimmune disease yet to be diagnosed, or it could be Sjogren's joint pain. So it's a complicated, obviously, to answer. I'm not a doctor either, I should say, but also as a doctor would say online, it was a little hard to answer exactly, but it could be Sjogren's joint pain, or it could be something else causing that.
Okay, one more question regarding the guidelines. They were wondering if there's been consideration, and you may be in another slide that you're presenting, about treatment regarding guidelines for diet, exercise, mental health, wellness, and spiritual well-being regarding Sjogren's.
Excellent question. So a couple of things. One is our exercise actually is a very top suggested guideline for fatigue. In fatigue, our doctors and the medical experts, as well as the research, shows that exercise can help fatigue because the endorphins from exercise do help patients that suffer from a mild to moderate to severe fatigue. Although it sounds counterproductive to think, oh, I should go home and not rest, I should go out for a walk, but regular exercise makes a big difference. So we do look at that in all of our guidelines, including lung, it was looked in as well. Finally, in regards to diet, it is a huge challenge. I wish we could do more nutritional research because the question is so spot on. In our Sjogren's patients, about 10% of our patients are gluten insensitive, which is a precursor for celiac, and maybe another 5% actually have celiac as well. But the challenge, if you know a lot about nutrition studies, is doing a nutrition research project in the United States is so challenging because you almost have to lock people up in a hospital or a dormitory or somewhere where you control everything they do around nutrition to be able to concretely give advice on nutrition to say that this research project showed XYZ. That's why you don't see as much nutritional research done, because it's such a challenge. Because yes, the patients can tell you they didn't eat or didn't do certain things, but very hard not in a controlled environment to do nutritional research. We wish there was more nutritional research being done because it really would help our patient population, because there's differing opinions on which diet patients should follow. And so our advice and our medical advice is to follow what works for you. And when it stops working, change to something that works for you again. And sometimes you'll see great success in changing your diet for a long term. Sometimes you'll see it short term. And sometimes it'll be based on food like gluten. Avoiding gluten helps a number of our patients who might not even have celiac because it just helps their body feel better. So it is a challenge, but we definitely aren't avoiding those topics and definitely are looking at that. Mental health and wellness. Surely there's a number of organizations, Mental Health America being one of them, that we partner with. They're part of the National Health Council, which we are doing amazing studies on wellness and mental health. And so you'll see some of that in our studies. We surely hit that last year in our webinars, but I don't know if I'll have guidelines on wellness right away, but definitely not a topic we avoid, because I think, as you, Ben, can attest, I'm one to kind of hit every topic we possibly can to make sure that we're not avoiding it, because we want to help everybody that we can that have the disease. So great observation and questions. I'll move on to the next slide, Ben, and move into what we're doing to serve as the voice for all Sjogren's patients. We regularly advocate on behalf of patients to doctors, on Capitol Hill. Last year, as I mentioned, we had our shortage in the hydroxychloroquine situation, major shortage, where we had to jump into action, where our patients were being denied their refills or being told to ration pills. And a drug like hydroxychloroquine, you just can't stop taking or take on and off sporadically. And so it was a major issue when the administration started to promote hydroxychloroquine as a magic pill for COVID, which we knew from studies that weren't published yet, it wasn't the case. And we started to learn that, but they were still promoting it, and it became very struggling for us, along with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis patients and those organizations. We joined together, but we also did some individual outreach to the pharmaceutical makers of the drug to see if they could increase their pipeline. We also went to Capitol Hill, and we went to the CDC and other organizations and the FDA to encourage them to do everything they can to increase the pipeline with hydroxychloroquine in the US. And luckily, were able to do that, but then finally it was admitted that hydroxychloroquine wasn't working, and thus they were able to release the stockpile that the administration had put into the federal stockpile, releasing about 60 million doses of hydroxychloroquine. So now we have an oversupply of hydroxychloroquine, but our patients are getting treated correctly once again. We also do many other things with NIH and the FDA, building relationships, and we did just successfully win an advocacy fight to get ICD coding changed for our disease, although sounds minor if you don't know ICD coding or how hard a change is to get done. But we were able to actually now have specific guidelines or specific coding for Sjogren's in the ICD listing. And the ICD listing and many of you have seen this but didn't know it was called ICD. When you go to the doctor, they mark down either on their laptop or on the piece of paper what you were diagnosed with, and there's a code for that that's been identified by the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control and Centers for Medicare. And we did not have our specific coding specific to Sjogren's. We are hidden under a dryness code. And thanks to an amazing group of doctors, as well as my staff, they were able to get the coding changed to have a specific Sjogren's code, but also most importantly, we have 12 subcategories under that code. So not only can we track a Sjogren's diagnosis, we can track their symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms that are related to their Sjogren's, pulmonary symptoms that are related to their Sjogren's, et cetera. And that will be huge for data for us in a few years to see how many people have these subsets of complications, as well as how many have been diagnosed formally with the disease. So very exciting about that change as well.
Yeah, Steve, along those lines with the coding and everything, one of the participants mentioned about any relationship to sarcoidosis in the lung. It seems that they have many similar symptoms. And, you know, is Sjogren's a rapidly moving disease? And for a child, does it progress more slowly compared to an adult? You know.
So great question on sarcoidosis. So sarcoidosis is a separate disease, although could be misdiagnosed because it could be a Sjogren's complication, and vice versa. A Sjogren's complication could be missed and it could be sarcoidosis. Very similar, just different. Sarcoidosis happens in the lungs, obviously, and it is a disease that is separate from Sjogren's, although mimics a lot of symptoms. That's our challenge with our disease. A lot of diseases mimic Sjogren's, so even including menopause. So why it took so long to get diagnosed oftentimes is patients were in perimenopause or premenopause or menopause, and the disease symptoms mimic that. So doctor said, oh, no problem, you just have menopause. And then what happens is they get through menopause and they realize they still have these horrible symptoms and get diagnosed with Sjogren's. Same with sarcoidosis. Some of those symptoms mimic our disease and vice versa. So why doctors have to be so astute, and why our guidelines will help, because we identify what Sjogren's in the lung is doing versus what another lung disease might do separately, and that's a separate disease. In regards to children, children seem to present with more fatigue and salivary gland swelling in their face a little bit differently than adults. Progression seems about the same. We don't have a lot of research on progression long term, but the disease right now in adults does not shorten the lifespan. It just challenges their life. It's very life altering. Surely claims some lives because of lung complications and lymphoma, but it's not necessarily exactly a life threatening disease, but a life altering disease. With Sjogren's children, you'll see more joint pain as well. And so just some challenges with being able to stay on schoolwork, being able to have a normal life, as well as I think the biggest challenge for Sjogren's children and their parents is what is their life going to look like? The fear of they don't know, the unknown. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of history because we've only in the last 10 years started to look at children a lot more seriously and seeing it. But right now, so far, those that have aged into their 20s or 30s with the disease seem to have the same symptoms, no more or worse progression than other patients do as well. But great questions, and I'm glad that you identified that question as well.
Thank you.
In regards to some areas that we're leading and encouraging and funding research, thanks to the support of organizations like Daughters of Penelope, is we did launch our International Clinical Trials Consortium a number of years ago, where we have 25 key opinion leaders from Europe and the US that we bring together, along with 9 corporate partners, pharmaceutical partners that are looking at Sjogren's as potential therapies, along with our staff that are helping us do a number of things. On the next slide, you'll see that this consortium is coming together to help really figure out how we can best launch clinical trials and make them the most accessible for patients, as well as speed them up as fast as we can. As I mentioned earlier during the treatment section, there is no one treatment for our disease, but we are excited to tell you that 9 pharmaceutical companies are currently investigating different compounds or assets that they feel can treat the entire disease of Sjogren's. Within those 9 companies, they have 24 compounds they've identified. None of those compounds are repurposed compounds, which sometimes you'll hear a drug on the market is being repurposed to treat another disease. No drug on the market is currently in those 24 being repurposed. These are all brand new compounds that have been identified from pharmaceutical companies that have potential in our disease, and they're now entering clinical trials. We'll have 2 in phase 3 this year. There's usually 4 phases in a clinical trial, but phase 1 and phase 2 of those compounds look very, very promising. So we're very excited to be going into phase 2 with 2 drugs. And we have a number entering phase 2 this year as well. And then we help those companies market their clinical trials, but also we assist them in their design. For example, we work with them on what should a company be looking for or not looking for in a patient, what age range, what blood work should they be looking for. We also look at what should they not be excluding. Should they not exclude people? Should they exclude people that have lupus or not exclude people? Let people who have lupus into the trial. We work with them on making sure that we work with them for patients' lifestyles. Do they have to go off their hydroxychloroquine? Do they have to stop taking their eye drops to go on this clinical trial? Do they have to travel to a doctor's office every single week for blood work? And working with them on figuring out the best design that will work for our patients. And we do that by having patients talk to these companies, not us talk to them. We bring in focus groups and patients to talk to these companies to educate them about living with the disease, but also to look at these criteria and tell them that might not work for a lot of patients. You might want to rethink your design. And it's been very helpful to speed along the clinical trial timeline because some of those roadblocks when companies don't listen to patients, they see the roadblock about 18 months too late and they've got to back way up to change their design. So very important we have them in early. And we have a whole page on clinical trials on our website that people can find the latest trials in the country, as well as learn more about the myths of clinical trials in regards to what people think about them, what really happens when you're in a clinical trial as well. In addition to the clinical trials work, we work on a number of international research initiatives and national. We are working in a biomarkers consortium here in the United States to figure out better biomarkers for the disease. I mentioned that earlier about salivary biomarkers or lacrimal gland tear biomarkers. We're also working on 2 international projects, one called Harmonics that just ended, that was based out of Athens, Greece. I'm sure you'll be glad to hear that. And I'll talk a little bit about Dr. Zoufis in a moment. But Harmonics was a 12 million euro project. We were glad to be a part of that. I served on the steering committee. And they were looking at harmonizing, that's the word harmonic, harmonizing data from 21 centers in Europe and the United States so that they could look at different research cohorts across international lines and across research lab lines, so that we could look at a lab in Norway, their patients in their research studies, with a group from Paris and a group from United States, for example. But there's 21 different labs that we brought all their data and harmonized the data so people could go into a database and look at it and look at different ways to look at different cross populations. Necessity is a project being run out of Paris, France, looking at clinical trials and outcome measures in regards to what better measures could we be looking at to see if a drug works, so that the FDA and the EMA, which is the equivalent in Europe, is called EMA, that the FDA and EMA would look at these measures and say, yes, if those measures get better, we would approve your drug. That's what an outcome measure is. And so Necessity is looking at inventing better outcome measures that EMA and FDA would verify and validate and approve to be used in clinical trials. And then we fund innovative research projects ourselves here from the Sjogren Foundation here in the United States. And Ben's going to talk in a few minutes about a few unique connections with Greek researchers that received our grants, which is just coincidence because we give it to the most meritorious grant applications that we get each year. But we've had a number of researchers from Greek descent that received our grants as well. But we have 2 different grant programs, our high impact grant awards at 75, and then pilot programs where people can get just some seed money to try a new idea and see if there's any truth or something behind it that will lead them to a bigger grant down the road. And then, which leads me perfectly, I didn't know it was going to set me up to talk a little bit about some of our Greek ancestry that gets involved in the foundation and who is involved. I'll first start with Dr. Tina Pappas. Dr. Tina Pappas is professor of dental research and the head of the Division of Oral Medicine at Tufts University of Dental Medicine. She is an amazing researcher. Not only has she received $24 million in grant money since 1978 for her work in oral medicine and Sjogren's, but she's also led 65 clinical trials, many of them in Sjogren's specifically, but others in dry mouth. What's unique about Tina, I know her very well and personally. Tina is an oral medicine specialist, and obviously went to Harvard, and you can learn more about her. But she is looked at as almost as a rheumatologist. She knows the disease probably better than a lot of rheumatologists in the United States. She runs an amazing clinical trial lab. So she is looked to actually do clinical trials for biologics to treat the whole disease. She's looked at way higher than just a dentist, and that's why she's led so many clinical trials. Typically, you won't see a dentist have run 65 clinical trials in the US, but because of her dedication and passion. Now she's supposed to be retiring soon, and she was really supposed to retire last year. But as she keeps saying, I refuse to retire till a drug is on the market for Sjogren's. And she really is an amazing advocate for us. And we wouldn't be where we are without Tina Pappas. She serves on our medical board, spoken at conferences. Some of you met her in the past, as you can see from the picture. And so Elena's in that picture, and then others have met her as well. And she's just an amazing advocate for our patient population. And patients literally fly in from around the world to see Tina. And many patients from the US drive from all over to go see her, but she has an international following as well. The next slide will show two additional Greek researchers that have been instrumental in Sjogren's. First is Dr. Harry Mistopoulos and Dr. Athanasios Zoufis. Dr. Mistopoulos retired a couple of years ago, and he was actually honored at the International Sjogren Syndrome Symposium. He really was a founder in Sjogren's for many years. He was one of probably the leading 10 Sjogren's founders in the world. He helped identify many early research projects, and he just, as I mentioned, retired a couple of years ago in his 80s. Dr. Zoufis took over for Dr. Mistopoulos in Athens. He has done amazing research. He speaks at our conferences here in the United States, and he also, as I mentioned, is the lead researcher that received the 14 million euro commitment from the EU Commission to do the Harmonics project. It was, as I mentioned, 21 international research partners, and he and his counterparts in Greece, there was 4 locations in Greece, along with additional from around the country and technical partners that came together. I served on the steering committee, along with Kathy Hammett, who served on a number of the subcommittees as well, who's a staff of the foundation. So I've been to Greece probably before COVID about 2 to 3 times a year to meet with this group to push this process forward and to lend the patient voice, as well as my experience in clinical trials with this project. And we're very proud of Dr. Zoufis' work. It just ended on December 31st. Reports are coming out. They do have a website, and you surely can Google Dr. Zoufis and hear all about his astounding career in Sjogren's. And when I say that we have so many researchers in Sjogren's, since many of you have never heard of the disease, you'll be astounded to know there's hundreds and hundreds of researchers that work full-time in Sjogren's. They're not just dabbling in Sjogren's and dabbling in another disease and another disease. They are full-time in Sjogren's, hundreds and hundreds of researchers around the world. And when I first joined, my mother had the disease, but I would have never guessed there was 10 or 20 working in Sjogren's full-time, because I'd never heard of the disease really before my mother was diagnosed. And so it's so heartwarming to our patients to know that there's so many working full-time. And then of course to have amazing dedicated people like Dr. Pappas or Dr. Zoufis work in our field. We're very, very blessed for sure. So, and I'll turn it over to Ben to talk specifically about a couple of our research grants that we've given to those that have Greek connections as well.
Thank you, Steve. And I will actually add quickly that after one of the first years that we were honored to be recognized as a national project, we recognized the Daughters of Penelope at our National Patient Conference, which is obviously where that picture came, and we were grateful for Elena and the grant president at the time to attend. We also had honored Dr. Pappas for our Healthcare Professional of the Year, and that was not at all on purpose, but it was a very welcome coincidence, and she really loved having the connection with the daughters. So that was something we were really excited to be able to have. So as Steve mentioned, one of the things that I personally have actually enjoyed, one of the many things I've enjoyed about the relationship that we've had with the Daughters of Penelope is as I continually learn about all the different connections that the Sjogren's Foundation and Sjogren's in general has to the Greek community, I always actually get very excited when I hear the Greek name, and I make a note to share it with Eleanor or anyone that I'm able to speak with. 3 of those individuals are Dr. Pavlakis, who is in New York. He's a neurologist who has participated on our clinical practice guidelines, spoken at a national patient conference, Sjogren's one-day conference in New York City. He received his medical degree from Athens. We also have given 2 research grants that Steve just referred to Dr. Katsougenis and Dr. Paparakis, who are also doctors and researchers who got their graduate degrees and start in Athens in Greece in general. So that is always something that, like I said, I love to bring that connection in. I was actually the very first time we were introduced to the Daughters of Penelope, the more I found out about this, I was very excited to know that there was such a strong connection between the foundation and the Greek community. And that is something that we're certainly grateful for and love to promote. I will also mention very quickly, just to piggyback one of the things that Steve had mentioned, while obviously we are incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to talk about the disease and to tell you how the support of Daughters of Penelope has helped all of the things that we're doing, as Steve explained. There are the health and wellness, for example, that we did, the Zoom over the last year, are on our website. And while they are for the Sjogren's patient community, they are certainly something that could speak to anybody. So if any of the daughters are interested, you can simply go to our website and find the town halls that we did. I can also happily send a link to those so that you can find them. And again, a lot of those dealt with health and wellness and exercise and managing living at home and not being able to get out. And so that's certainly something that I would definitely want to share with anyone. And the other thing that Steve also mentioned that I just wanted to reiterate is that in the world of Sjogren's, obviously, we heavily stress the fact that because it takes so long to diagnose, because there's so many symptoms, that we are constantly encouraging patients to be their own best advocate. And so when they're going to a dentist and obviously they have an issue with dry mouth, that if the dentist doesn't ask them about any other dryness issues, that they will share some of the issues that they have, whether it's fatigue or joint pain, and so that they're able to sort of get an answer more themselves. And I would just say to daughters in whether it's Sjogren's or anything, being your own best advocate is obviously hugely beneficial. Asking questions, not being scared to share your symptoms with your doctor, even if you're at a dentist and you're talking about dry skin or something along those lines that may play a role in something else. So I just wanted to reiterate that again. And then last, as I have mentioned, the Sjogren's Foundation is incredibly grateful to have established this relationship. I once again want to thank Kathy Lawrence, who is someone who introduced us to the daughters, who if you haven't heard her story, is incredibly moving and one that I would certainly encourage you to hear. It's also opened the door. It's quite remarkable the number of Sjogren's patients we've learned that are in the daughters community, which is, I'm sorry to know, but I'm obviously grateful that because of this relationship that they have found us and we have found them and been able to get them involved in various events around the country, attend conferences, participate in general. As Vera Menalakis is one of the individuals in a picture with Kathy is one of those individuals that is a daughter and also involved. So we are truly grateful for the daughters' support. It's been very rewarding to be able to partner with such a remarkable group. While I understand that there is not maybe that direct connection to the disease, obviously we've shown the Greek community and the various patients. I think this is just a wonderful honor for us to be able to partner and help raise awareness while you're also funding great work that hopefully you can be proud of and know that you're making a difference as well. So, I once again thank Grand President Celia, Grand Secretary Georgette, and Grand Governor Kathy, as well as Elena. It's been an honor and a privilege to be able to get to know all of you. I was saying to Grand President Celia, we actually met just about a year ago when I came into DC, and we basically got it right under the wire before everyone was unable to leave their houses. So I was excited to have that opportunity and just be able to talk and learn more about what you're doing and share what we're doing. And so I thank you all, and I welcome any other questions that you may have.
Yes, so there's one more. Steve had mentioned about gluten and celiac with nutrition, but this kind of refers to the effects of simple sugars, processed sugar, desserts, ice cream, worsening symptoms of osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis. And has there been any studies showing that this can adversely affect or worsen Sjogren's as well?
Yeah, there's been some studies in regards to autoimmune diseases and simple sugars being cut out. It's still not fully definitive in regards to what exactly it does, except there's maybe a little more leaning towards definitive that sugars can make some symptoms worse. However, it really comes down to triggering effect, finding what works for patients and what doesn't. Most of the research also shows eating a healthy, well-balanced diet with a lot of greens and a lot of vegetables is good for a patient. Of course, it's good for all of us. So saying that sounds a little, hokey, because we are all told that for our heart health, our lung health, our diabetes health, whatever it is, we're all told that. And so, so that's not shocking to hear that. There's been a number of diets put out there, and that's why it's such a challenge for our patients to figure out which diet should they follow. So our guidelines and our doctors have typically said, work at individual elimination of things till you find thing that's triggering what you're triggering, and see if that works, as well as you can go on a diet and see if it works. The challenge with a diet, and I'll tell you, we've had a number of patients go on a diet 2 months in, a month in, they feel it's almost cured their Sjogren's. The challenge is then 2 more months later, the disease is still back. So it doesn't always work. The disease isn't going to go away because of your diet. You might feel better for a month or two. Anytime we start to eat healthy or exercise the first month, we all start feeling healthy. And so the same thing, when you change up your diet, you're going to start feeling healthy for a while. It might last long-term or it might not. And so it does take trial and error, and it takes time to see how it really works. But eating healthy, cutting things out is always very, very important. And the sugar thing, I think, is a great point. It definitely is one area that doctors talk to patients about trying to cut as well.
And
I appreciate that comment.
thank you. And Executive Director Elena put the website, sjogrens.org, the URL in the chat website, but you can look it up at sjogrens.org, just to let everyone know. And thank you very much for this very informative and enlightening presentation. And I know for many people, they're hearing about it, not knowing, as Grand President Celia said initially, very much about it. Just a reminder that this recording webinar will also be on the DOP website for those that weren't able to join in today. And seeing Dr. Harry Matsopoulos, when I was working as a nurse at NIH, he was on the rheumatology floor back many years ago with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And I remember working with him. He was at the University of Yanina at the time. So that's what I was thinking. He probably was retired by now, but it's nice to see all the Greek collaboration that you all are doing. So thank you so much again for all that great information. Now our Grand President Celia will give her concluding remarks.
Well, I want to thank you both, Steve and Ben, for taking the time to share all the information that you have in your presentation on Sjogren syndrome. Gosh, you can talk very quickly. You get a lot of information out there in an hour. I'm sure that our membership has gleaned some information, but I'm certain that they're going to be pleased that it's going to be on the YouTube channel and or it was on Facebook, and they could be able to see it again, and on our website, because there's just so much information there for everybody to be able to share and to reprocess, because there was a lot there. I also want to thank our organizers today, Grand Secretary Georgette, Grand Governor Kathy, and of course our Executive Director Elena, for coordinating and setting up our webinar. And I also wish to thank past District Governor Kathy Lawrence for chairing this committee and this project on behalf of the Daughters of Penelope. I want to thank the sisters, and again thank our presenters, and for all your thoughtful questions about Sjogren syndrome. So until next time, stay well, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon on Zoom, of course. Elena, our next presentation.
Yes, and thank you, Celia. Thank you, everybody. I echo Kathy and Celia's words. We really want to thank you, Steve and Ben, for all you do at Sjogren, and for really helping our membership to understand the complexities of Sjogren so that we can continue to raise awareness and, of course, funds for this very important research. So our next webinar is next Friday at 9 p.m. with our very own Daughters of Penelope Foundation, Inc. And our panelists will be Daughters Foundation President Anna Helene Grossimanides, who's also the Daughters of Penelope past Grand President. So we're looking forward to seeing you all there. And thank you so much again, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.